Well, thank you very much. I've got far too much material to get through in far too little time, so I'm not going to dwell on the past too much. I'll try and give a view on what I think is going to happen over the next year. I may touch on the year after that afterwards, but let's just go to what we did say back in 2007, and it was very nice to get that intro, but if anything, I wish we'd been more bearish. We just weren't negative enough. I'm not sure if I'd still have a job if I'd gone out and said what I thought, but we did see elements of things that were happening. The housing market was clearly on the verge of falling, and we felt that that was going to be a much bigger fall than we'd seen previously. We would have negative house price growth, and there would be some form of feed-through to the financial system. Unfortunately, we had no real clue just how bad it was going to be. I can't say we got it right, because we didn't, but perhaps we came a little bit nearer than some others, and Bloomberg were very kind to say that we'd been a better forecaster than most of the people in our peer group, at least over the last 3 years period. Not quite sure how it's going to go looking forward, but let's give it a try. Now, I've got to do this very briefly. This was the guy that I spoke with back in 2007. I spoke first, and Michael Ivanovic, who I don't believe is here tonight, so he can't defend himself. I didn't get to defend myself back in 2007 as he rubbished my forecast and said, housing will never bring down the US economy. It's only 6% of GDP. Yes, but Michael, 6% falling at 30 or 40% annualized, it makes a difference. And if it does it for about 2 years, it does have an impact. And when house prices fall, the growth doesn't just slow down, then it makes a bigger difference because people default, and then banks get into trouble, and then we're all in trouble. So housing matters. So where are we right now? Well, we've got some better news, I guess. I'm never very optimistic, so you have to bear that in mind as I run through this. But the news is looking a lot better than it has for quite a while. At least GDP is beginning to pick up in most of the major economies, the ones that I look at every day. You'll be pleased to know I don't actually cover the Czech Republic. Every economy I've ever forecast in the past has generally collapsed within a couple of years of me looking at it. So as soon as I start to look at the Czech Republic, I'll be sure and let you know you can start shorting the stocks. But at the moment, things are looking reasonably good. We've had a bit of a setback in the fourth quarter from the Eurozone. But the news out of the United States was another fantastic quarter of growth. I guess, if you don't mind the quality of the growth being really dreadful, if inventory build is all you really care about, then it's great. So that's really where we are right now. The difficulty is that a lot of the things that have been driving growth are not going to continue. And in the next few slides, I'm going to run through one element of how we look at forecasting. It's nowhere near as sophisticated as the previous speaker's speech about inflation forecasting. We take a very much a kind of seat of the pants, back of the envelope approach, but it suits us, it works okay. This is what the current consensus view is of the world. As the GDP numbers have turned around from about the third quarter of 2009, forecasts of world growth have been picking up. 3.9 is, I think, the current view that the IMF are putting out. I think last year we've got something like an estimated minus 0.8 for the world. We've got a consensus view, this is from Consensus Economics, for the US of something like 3.1. Our ING view is not massively different from that at the moment, but it's a view that we put out with a great deal of trepidation, because as I'll suggest in a second, we either feel it's going to be considerably better or considerably worse than that, but that the consensus view is probably one of those unattainable kind of medians which we're unlikely to get. View on the Eurozone, 1.1, again a consensus view, was slightly more upbeat on the Eurozone than consensus. UK was slightly more downbeat. China was slightly more upbeat. So we're a little bit all over the place. I have to say where we are, otherwise it's not fair. But that's roughly where the consensus and the view of the world is. Clearly we've moved on a long way from 2009. The worst is past, so let's be thankful for that. But why isn't it going to be the consensus view? There's one aspect of what I think is happening at the moment which is absolutely critical, and that's confidence. And I think that confidence is still lacking. I think we had some Eurozone confidence figures again today, which looked a little bit soft. The US numbers, they've picked up over the last couple of months, but they're very, very soggy compared to what we think is going to happen. And confidence is one of these elements where when you start forecasting consumer expenditure, which still is the biggest chunk of pretty well any GDP forecast you're going to put together, that confidence influences one bit of it, the savings rate. And that can make a huge difference to whether it's above consensus or below consensus, but very, very rarely consensus. So this is how we think of the world, a very simplistic sort of format. It's consumption, it's real wages, not nominal wages. Take the growth rate of that, add the growth in employment, take some transfers from the government, of which there are still a lot at the moment, throw in something about other incomes. Clearly not everyone is in employment. Some people work for themselves. Some people just live on their investments. And then finally that changes in the savings rate. So starting with wages, we've got some really helpful relationships in the United States which make forecasting very easy. Wages tend to lag what's happening to employment growth with a fantastic two-year lag. And you don't get very many of those sorts of lags to enable you to forecast anything in macroeconomics for that far. So 2 years, I'll take that any day of the week. Now, it's slightly more complicated because what we have to look at is weekly wages, not just hourly wages growth. And weekly wages get flipped around by what's happening to hours worked. Hours worked are picking up at the moment, but the hourly wage rates are still falling. We expect them to fall for at least another 12 months. So we're looking at something like nominal wage growth around the 2.5, perhaps 3 level, with the hourly wage growth maybe offsetting some of the hours worked, not maybe moving too far above the current level in terms of weekly wages growth. So we're pretty happy with that bit of the equation. So we'll move on and look at another bit, and that's the employment side. Well, there are lots of things you could say about employment, but one of the ones that you can say with absolute certainty is every business cycle that the United States, and for that matter the United Kingdom, not some of the Eurozone economies, but we'll leave those till slightly later, every single business cycle has seen a longer and longer period for the jobs lost in a recession to be replaced. From peak employment down to the trough, back to the peak, longer and longer and longer. In the 70s, it took something like 24 months. In the 80s, 36 months. The last recession we got back in 2001 to 48 months, a full 4 years. This time, the fall in in employment has been even more dramatic. We think it could be 5 years or more before you get back to the sorts of peak levels that you got last time. Reasons for this? Well, all sorts of things, but the fact that the service sector is a bigger component of the economy is probably one of the areas. Globalization is another. Okay, you close your factory down in a recession. When it opens up in China, not in your economy. So the jobs do get recreated, just not locally. So there are all sorts of reasons for not expecting there to be a lot in the way of employment growth, and we're tentatively suggesting something in the order of 75,000, that sort of average, over the rest of the year for non-farm payrolls, which in itself is a highly dubious figure, but leaving that aside, that gives you something like 0.5 percentage point growth in employment. Not very much. Add it together to those nominal wages, which were 2.5%, deflate those by inflation, that's about 2.5%. We're starting off employment and wages, we've got about 0.5% for consumption so far.